but at least it can be easily explained. The theme of Brave New World is not the advancement of science as such. It is the advancement of science as it affects human individuals. The triumphs of physics, chemistry, and engineering are tacitly taken for granted. The only scientific advances to be specifically described are those involving the application to human beings of the results of future research in biology, physiology, and psychology. It is only by means of the sciences of life that the quality of life can be radically changed. Again, it is only by means of the sciences of life that the quality of life can be radically changed. The sciences of matter can be applied in such a way that they will destroy life or make living it impossibly complex and uncomfortable, but unless used as instruments by the biologists and psychologists, they can do nothing to modify the natural forms and expressions of life itself. The release of atomic energy marks a great revolution in human history, but not unless we blow ourselves to bits and so put an end to our history, the final and most searching revolution. This really revolutionary revolution is to be achieved not in the external world, but in the souls and flesh of human beings. Living as he did in a revolutionary period, the Marquis de Sade very naturally made use of this theory of revolution in order to rationalize his peculiar brand of insanity. Robespierre had achieved the most superficial kind of revolution, the political. Going a little bit deeper, had attempted the economic revolution. Sade regarded himself as the apostle of the truly revolutionary revolution. Beyond mere politics and economics, the revolution in individual men, women, and children, whose bodies were henceforward to become the common sexual property of all, and whose minds were to be purged of all the natural decencies, all the laboriously acquired inhibitions of traditional civilization. Between sadism and the really revolutionary revolution there is, of course, no necessary or inevitable connection. Sade was a lunatic, and the more or less conscious goal of his revolution was universal chaos and destruction. The people who govern the brave new world may not be sane in what may be called the absolute sense of the word, but they are not madmen, and their aim is not anarchy but social stability. It is in order to achieve stability that they carry out by scientific means the ultimate, personal, really revolutionary revolution. But meanwhile, we are in the first place of what is perhaps the penultimate revolution. Its next phase may be atomic warfare, in which case we do not have to bother with prophecies about the future, but it is conceivable that we may have enough sense, if not to stop fighting altogether, at least to behave as rationally as did our 18th century ancestors. The unimaginable horrors of the 30 Years' War actually taught men a lesson, and for more than 100 years the politicians and generals of Europe consciously resisted the temptation to use their military resources to the limits of destructiveness, or, in the majority of conflicts, to go on fighting until the enemy was totally annihilated. They were aggressors, of course, greedy for profit and glory, but they were also conservatives determined at all costs to keep their world intact as a going concern. For the last 30 years, there have been no conservatives. There have been only nationalistic radicals of the right and nationalistic radicals of the left. The last conservative statesman was the 5th Marquis de Lanzon, and when he wrote a letter to the Times suggesting that the First World War should be concluded with a compromise, as most of the wars of the 18th century had been, the editor of that once conservative journal refused to print it. The nationalistic radicals had their way, with the consequences that we all know: Bolshevism, fascism, inflation, depression, Hitler, the Second World War, the ruin of Europe, and all but universal famine. Assuming then that we are capable of learning as much from Hiroshima as our forefathers learned from Magdeburg, We may look forward to a period, not indeed of peace, but of limited and only partially ruinous warfare. During that period, it may be assumed that nuclear energy will be harnessed to industrial uses. The result, pretty obviously, will be a series of economic and social changes unprecedented in rapidity and completeness. All the existing patterns of human life will be disrupted, and new patterns will have to be improvised to conform with the non-human fact of atomic power. To progress this in modern dress, the nuclear scientists will prepare the bed on which mankind must lie, and if mankind doesn't fit, well, that will be just too bad for mankind. There will have to be some stretching and a bit of amputation, the same sort of stretchings and amputations as have been going on ever since applied science really got into its stride, only this time they will be a good deal more drastic than in the past. These far from painless operations will be directed by highly centralized totalitarian governments, inevitably so, for the immediate future is likely to resemble the immediate past, and in the immediate past, rapid technological changes taking place in a mass-producing economy and among a population predominantly propertyless have always tended to produce economic and social confusion. To deal with the confusion, power has been centralized and government control increased. It is probable that all warfare's governments will be more or less completely totalitarian, even before the harnessing of atomic energy. That they will be totalitarian during and after the harnessing seems almost certain. Only a large-scale popular movement toward decentralization and self-help can arrest the present tendency towards statism. At present, there is no sign that such a movement will take place.